to find out more and perhaps cover what you do on my platform. But without further ado, please welcome to the stage our panelists. We got enough seats? Hope so. Just stick it down there. Okay, fantastic. So welcome everybody to the stage. I think first off, can you just introduce yourselves, what it is you do, please?
Sure. Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Seung-eun Lee. I represent the Sandbox. I'm the UK Business Development Lead. Some of you might know the Sandbox, some of you might not, so I'll go on and explain. It's a decentralized open gaming metaverse, and we have over 4.2 million active users with wallets, and we have partnered with over 400 brands across various industries, from fashion to music to financial services, such as HSBC, Gucci that you just mentioned, Adidas, and Warner Music as well. So I'm really excited to be on this panel. Thank you so much, John.
Hi, everyone. My name's Alex Holder. I'm the Commercial Strategy Director at Geek. Geek is an enterprise data platform that empowers brands like Gucci, Tommy Hilfiger, L'Oreal, to navigate the metaverse effectively. So we're Web 2 gaming platforms and Web 3 gaming platforms agnostic, and we really take a data-led approach to empower these brands to make smart decisions.
Hey everyone, I'm Mihai. I'm the metaverse lead at Newzoo. And Newzoo is basically a market research firm in the gaming industry. We are best known for our reports on the gaming market. So that goes for traditional games, esports, cloud, mobile, and so on and so forth. But we're also providing data and consultancy services to pretty much anyone who's interested in the gaming industry. So this includes game developers, game publishers. We're working with most of the big ones, and just brands who are interested in gaming.
Hey guys, I'm Andy from Brand Exchange. We help businesses actually focus a lot on the wellness industry, but help businesses transition into Web3. Have experience with Sandbox, actually, building the fitness metaverse over there, and onboarding brands to a Web3 experience of some kind through NFTs and metaverse.
Hi, I'm John Goddard. I'm Senior Director of Brand and Communications at Lockwood Publishing, who make a game called Avakin Life, which is one of the leading mobile metaverse games. Been around since 2013, 8 million monthly active users. And I've been working with brands in video games for 20 plus years, since PlayStation 2 days.
Wonderful. So ostensibly onboarding brands through blockchain as opposed to blockchain gaming is two very different kettles of fish, let's say. What do you see as the key differences between those two approaches?
Yeah, I can go ahead. So yeah, blockchain gaming is totally different than just blockchain, I would say. And then I think I can explain in two different perspectives. One is user perspective and the other is brand perspective. So user-wise, metaverse or blockchain gaming is very immersive. Louis Rosenberg is a unanimous AI CEO. He famously said metaverse is inevitable because it's in our DNA. Because that's how we learn and understand the world, through spatial experience. So blockchain gaming facilitates that. It's very immersive, and also it's very social. We have a product manager just dedicated to creating social interactions. So we're developing emotes that you can do with another avatar, like high fives, or social chats. That's really important as well. And also, blockchain gaming is very interactive. It's not just PFP blockchain you see on OpenSea, right? You get to talk to the characters there, you play the games, and participate in the brand experience. And from the brand perspective, it's very interesting too, because brand placement on the blockchain gaming is not alone or impermanent. What I mean by that is marketing campaigns are usually, it has defined time span and has defined products. But on the blockchain gaming, it's not. It's always there. It's continuous and it's revisitable as well. And also because of interoperability, you can interact with lots of different brands. So I guess that's the biggest difference that I would see.
Yeah, so I would like to cover two components. So I think one of them is the brand component, and the other one is the kind of the user component and the game developer component. So the way I see it, I have a slightly more pessimistic view, let's say. Like, the way that brands are currently engaging with basically brands currently view Web3 as a good vehicle for marketing. So currently blockchain games are arguably a pretty niche segment of the overall gaming ecosystem. And by no means are they a proven subcategory of games as a whole. Like if you look at how mobile adoption has happened and how big publishers and big developers were thinking about mobile games. So basically, mobile games started to become big, started to launch and become big back in 2008, 2009. But if you look at the big players, they've only started to get their hands dirty with mobile gaming relatively recently. So it took about 8 to 10 years for publishers like Activision to acquire King, and now recently Take-Two has also acquired Zynga. EA has also made some plays. So it took almost a decade for mobile gaming to kind of be adopted by these bigger publishers, because the way they're looking at it is basically, why would we get, as a big publisher or developer, why would we get involved with blockchain gaming now when it's still very much not a proven concept, and we risk our reputation, which is basically one of the most valuable things we have. So from this perspective, I think it makes much more sense for startups who have less to lose to get engaged with blockchain games, and it doesn't make as much sense for the bigger, more established players, because they just have much more to lose. So let's just let the startups do their thing, and then once blockchain gaming actually becomes a thing, then we'll be able to implement our strategy, do some M&A, buy some players, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think I look at it from a different perspective. I look at it from why does a brand want to be in games, right? So what is the purpose for a brand investing its time, its resource into developing some sort of game proposition? And the answer is usually from a consumer perspective. They want to do something that their existing audience finds exciting. It's a way of retention. It's a way of appealing even more to the audience they have existing, or they want to tap into a new market segment. They want to expand their audience into a new place. They want to grow their market share, not through through kind of taking market share from their existing competitors, but they want to take advantage of a growing market. And I think what blockchain and Web3 brings to this is more, I guess it brings in the creator economy, the idea of UGC, and how you make consumers feel more a part of your brand. So rather than giving them, kind of the excitement of just being a part of that brand, maybe bringing them into kind of your brand world, you can now look at ways of increasing their engagement through the monetization of what they do. And I think we've all seen the success of the creator kind of economy as it is on the kind of Web 2 platforms. But what's really interesting is that those audiences who we now consider, audiences is the right word, who we consider to be very powerful, exist on platforms that are not native to the game, right? They're popular on Twitch, right? Because they stream a game there, right? And then they get sponsorship. They're popular on Instagram or YouTube, and they're earning revenue through existing advertising models. What blockchain does is it brings that influence back into the native experience. It allows influencers to be to monetize and be popular within the platform for which they're known, right? So it kind of squares that circle. It brings it back to the beginning. It brings it back to the core product, and I think that's where brands find a lot of excitement, even going beyond that kind of, because I guess currently they are putting their faith into products that are walled gardens in Web 2, right? These are products that exist beyond their control, they sign up to an existing ecosystem and then they appeal to the players or the fans that are there. If a brand can take advantage of having a more direct consumer relationship within one of those products or that type of product, that's what I think is drawing so much interest at the moment.
Great. And diving deeper into all three of those responses and also touching on to the Netflix presentation we just had, how are brands measuring their success in Web3, those that are already here? And are they measuring metrics in any way that's different to how they approached Web2?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pretext of all of this is actually over the last few years. Many brands haven't really been measuring success like they would in sort of traditional marketing channels. Because I think PR was a big driver of why brands were going into these spaces, to look super innovative, to do sort of R&D and discovery within all these different channels, and have sort of a good PR run for a few weeks potentially. But actually now what's happening is because so many brands are entering these spaces, sort of the metaverse hype is starting to end, and they are looking to actually, this is a sort of new communication channel of which needs clear frameworks of measuring success, right? And they're actually taking a lot of the traditional social media channel metrics and frameworks like awareness, interest, action, engagement, advocacy, and taking that framework and putting it into sort of a Web 2, Web 3 framework, which is to say, okay, awareness, interest largely is with obviously Web 2 gaming platforms right now, but when you sort of go down and you look at sort of things like action and engagement, the opportunity around digital goods and services, especially in Web3 environments, is very attractive to some of these brands because of ownership. They're not having to go into Web2 platforms like Roblox and play by the rules of those platforms, i.e. sharing revenue shares, etc. And so I think whilst a lot of these sort of in-house teams are building out, they are taking a holistic approach to the metaverse, of which that's Web2, that's Web3, that's esports, that's NFTs, and they're applying measurable benefits to each of those. So yeah, awareness obviously within Web2, but if you're looking at things like NFT compatibility and the ownership of the digital goods and sharing of IP that you're putting into these environments, there are benefits to both Web2 and Web3.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting question because the way I would assume most brands are looking at their gaming or their metaverse strategy, this is basically part of their broader digital strategy. And I think currently most brands are only allocating rather small amounts of money and resources to their gaming and metaverse strategies. And one of the reasons for that is that there aren't any clear performance metrics in place. So how do you know, a Roblox activation is successful? Are you looking at the number of visits in a month, the number of visits in 6 months? Are you looking at revenue? Are you looking at engagement? How do you know if that engagement is meaningful, and so on and so forth? So if executives are to be convinced of allocating more money and resources to this to the gaming industry and to the metaverse, I think there need to be clear KPIs and clear guidelines in place, because one of the reasons for which most companies are still allocating way more money to things like TV, for instance, is that you have clear performance guidelines. You already have the infrastructure and the relationships that are in place. So if you want to do a TV commercial, you know who to go to, you know where to go to, you know which markets that will reach, you know approximately how many people that will reach, and you kind of know what to expect. Whereas with gaming, we're still very much in the experimentation stage. So you do a Roblox experience and you just, you see what happens. You're not really sure as a brand. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in Web 2, if the marketing or user acquisition funnel was very linear, you go out and acquire users and achieve network effects. So the metrics that Web 2 companies have used were click-through rate or the revenue generated per customer and so on. But Web 3 has ecosystem and infrastructure that allows community to co-create the experience. And also, there's so much interactivity with different brands that there needs to be different metrics to measure Web3 brand success. And another thing I wanted to compare between Web2 and Web3 is that lots of Web2 success metrics focus on short-term profit gains, whereas Web3 facilitates long-term brand exposure. Let's look at secondary market, for example. In real life, resale takes place, 6 months to 1 year after, and there's no way for brands to actually capture that value that was sold at eBay, for example. But in Web3, you can do that in real time, in perpetuity as well. So yeah, definitely different success metrics need to be used in Web3.
Fantastic. And following on from that, we've already touched on this, but why should brands look at blockchain gaming as a way to enhance their customer relationships? And as the industry continues to innovate, how do you think blockchain gaming will change how brands engage with their audiences?
I'll go for that one. I'm going to use wellness as an example because that's where I sit. But it's all about incentivization and giving that ownership to the community. So for brands coming into the wellness space, looking at ways to incentivize consumers to be more active. And only 20% of the population is actually active. So we have a huge inactive population. And a lot of those will sit in the gaming space because we have 3 billion consumers. So how do we incentivize them to do activity? Blockchain's a great way to do that because you can own your assets and trade and potentially link it to real life utility as well. So when the brands come in and be part of the Web3 experience in wellness, they can offer real life utility that then helps and complements potential rewards in the blockchain space to incentivize people to do activity. So that's where it comes from for the wellness brands. And we saw huge adoption last year where we built an experience in Sandbox, a fitness metaverse, and we managed to bring 42 global brands into that space to be part of an experience that will launch actually next year in Alpha 4. But the incentivization for these brands to be involved was because they're tapping into new communities or new demographics and also future-proofing the business as well, because a lot of these consumers are alphas, Gen Z, and it's very tough for wellness brands to actually tap into that market. So that was a big plus for them.
Cool. So one of the core components of Web3 is, of course, this idea of true digital ownership. What opportunities do you think this presents to brands that are willing to explore the blockchain gaming space? And as technology such as AR, VR, machine learning, etc., continues to develop, how do you think the perception of digital ownership will change?
So I can start with that. And I'd like to actually start by making a distinction. So personally, in the last 6 months to a year and a half or so, blockchain games have been, one of the key arguments that proponents of blockchain games were bringing to the table was that blockchain games allow for real ownership of assets. But I think the real ownership of assets, or the importance of the real ownership of assets, might have been slightly overstated, so to say, and has mostly been used as a kind of a marketing ploy to bring in to increase interest in these types of games. So I don't think currently players are that interested in truly owning their assets, especially when owning an asset is such a confusing thing. Like, what does it mean to own an asset? Like, what do you exactly own when you own an NFT? Like, do you own the picture? Do you own the metadata that points to where that picture is stored? And so on and so forth. And if you really go down the rabbit hole, then you'll notice that you really don't truly own these assets in most cases. But what I do think blockchain games bring is that ability for players to trade. And I think this is a key issue that was also debated earlier in this conference. Because if you look at games like CSGO or Rocket League or WoW or any MMORPG for that matter, player trading has been a huge aspect of these games in the past and currently, and is likely going to be so in the future. However, most trading has been happening on third-party, unregulated websites that weren't accepted by the publisher. So in essence, if you traded these items, you risk getting banned. But the point is that players still traded these assets and spent quite a lot of money on it, billions every year on them. And this was without actually owning them. So players didn't care about owning the assets. People cared about trading these assets. And I think this is what's happening in the current iteration of blockchain games. People care more about being able to trade their assets rather than owning their assets.
Do you think that's because alphas and Gen Zs don't really understand the true meaning of ownership?
So I think having ownership of in-game assets is a powerful concept. And this is why I do think that digital collectibles and NFTs can definitely play a role in the future of gaming. Because actually, if we are going to spend more time in digital environments, we're gonna want to own, to own these items. And I fully believe that. But at the same time, if you look at most of the trading that's been happening in blockchain games, it's mostly been speculative. So there's very little substance there. People are just flipping assets left and right just to make money. They don't care about the games, the base games themselves. They just want to make a quick buck. They're not gamers. They're basically just speculators and investors. And I think we kind of need to move away from that mindset and towards a mindset where this trading happens in a meaningful manner. And it's mostly players that do this trading. And for that to happen, I think we obviously need games that, one, are good, two, are fun, and three, that bring real incentives for players to engage with them in a meaningful manner.
Which I agree with, but what I was actually, alluding to was the younger generations don't understand the true meaning of ownership in real life because they're still not on the property ladder yet and possibly don't own real assets. So actually, they don't realise how they can potentially commercialise, monetize, or there's more to it than just trading. So potentially, the education needs to be there for these younger generations to understand true ownership and how they can use that in gaming.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, Mihai, I think you are focusing just on players and users. If you look at creators' point of view, digital ownership is really powerful. For content creators that are on Web 2 platforms, their monetization isn't fair. So, yeah.
I think there's two things I'd like to explore is the concept of ownership and the concept of community as well, right? So you mentioned community. It's absolutely probably the number one buzzword any games company operating, certainly in free-to-play, cares about. Now, I remember when free-to-play launched, and what people very conveniently forget is why free-to-play became a thing. It came about for two reasons. Games companies were having to spend hundreds of millions in some cases on developing a game, all that investment front-loaded, and they had to hope that the brand or the marketing that they brought to bear would sell enough of those games to cover their costs. So the idea of monetizing your development cycle was a key component, right? It's like, why wait 3 years to launch a game? Let's actually launch a version of the game in a year and essentially be able to monetize our development so we see some of that money earlier. The second reason is piracy. Now, piracy was out of control 20 years ago on PC. I remember being in meetings where everyone was saying that PC games were dead because you couldn't do it. You just couldn't make money from it. So then there was something called digital rights management, DRM, which everyone hated, right? Because the idea was, if you had DRM, you didn't actually own the game, right? So the concept of ownership and owning a game, owning a physical piece of media was real. And then I agree, over the last 20 years of this kind of rise of free-to-play in gaming, the concept, and actually subscriptions as well, of anything from Netflix or, if you subscribe to Sky and you buy stuff and that platform dies, you lose that content. You don't own it anymore. So I think you're right, ownership is not understood. It certainly is understood by those who can monetize, right, the content creators, and those are obviously a different section of community. And sometimes those two groups don't actually, they're not the same. They're all your community, but your content creators are a different kind of thing because they're the ones who are monetizing. They're a very small number, really, in real terms, but I think the idea of giving them the power to monetize their content and making it easy, making sure that someone's not taking money off from you in revenue share or charging you unfair fees, and you as a digital owner can have that in perpetuity, that's what's powerful for them. But for the 90+% who are just players, and they're not gamers, right? They're players of particular games, and that's really important. That's where the trading point comes in. Trading is popular within a game ecosystem. The concept of trading between games, which is clearly something that could be empowered and is being empowered by blockchain, is irrelevant at this moment. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be powerful in the future.
I think that's a really interesting point about obviously ownership and digital goods. And if you look at a platform like Roblox or even Fortnite, you can make a very interesting argument that they're one of the largest apparel businesses in the world because they're not making money from the players paying to play their game. They're making money from the clothing and the digital goods that are being sold inside these environments. So if you take Gucci, for example, who are selling digital goods inside these environments, like a handbag that's actually selling more in Robux, which is the Roblox currency, than it actually retails in real life. And I think it sort of speaks to the point, Andy, you made around brands thinking about these decentralized platforms in the long run, and they're saying, actually, we want to be very native to these communities for when decentralized platforms and the infrastructure builds out, and in 5 to 10 years' time, digital goods might represent 5 to 10% of a fashion and apparel business. And do brands want to be looking like they're jumping on a bandwagon in 10 years' time, or do they want to be introducing themselves to these communities now? Very similar to sort of when social media came out and all the sort of businesses that dismissed social media as just a communication channel that just kids used. And then you had all these brands jumping on sort of the bandwagon 5 years later, and they lost market share to all these smart D2C companies. And so you're seeing companies like DressX who specialize just in digital assets and goods. And I think you can take that from a Web 2 perspective. And then when more and more audiences potentially join these Web 3 platforms, you can really see sort of the thesis of why a lot of brands are entering these spaces.
Oh, fantastic. Just to touch on what I said at the very start, in 2022, we've seen more brands explore blockchain gaming than ever before. From Gucci, as we've mentioned, to Kellogg's, to Microsoft and Sony's recent patents. How has the conversation changed in the past 12 months? Are brands more receptive to being a part of blockchain games now than they ever have been?
Yeah, we're seeing much interest. The volume of our brand partnership grew twofold, from 200 to 400 in the last 8 months. And not only the volume, but diversity of the sectors of industries that we're partnering with has increased as well. In the beginning, there are lots of entertainment and music and fashion brands that we partner with, but slowly we have more financial services and consumer goods coming in to partner with us. And on top of that, we're seeing different regional increase of users, and the brands are following after them. So we always had big presence in Korea and Hong Kong, but slowly we're having more communities in Thailand and Turkey and Dubai as well. So we're building those regions on the sandbox. And also we're building British Verse as well, where we're talking to different brands, and they're really interested in getting to know more about the metaverse ecosystem. And I think it's because of 3 reasons. One, blockchain is the future, so all the brands want to know how they can deploy their business objective and enable that. And 2, even though the consumer spending has gone down, free to play and play and earn is gaining a lot of users. And also, Sandbox is always innovating, and the game engines and user experiences keep getting evolved. So I think those 3 are the reasons why brands and users are coming on board.
Which way round did Sandbox tackle this? Was it brands first and bring the consumers, or was it consumers and the brands follow?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So probably brands first. That's one of the reasons that we are partnering with the brands, is to acquire users and show them the possibilities of what they can do on the sandbox. Come to the sandbox and choose your avatar and meet more friends and socialize and also play games and build reputations. And from there, more and more the virtual worlds look like physical world, and then there's more brands that are coming in that are in different sectors like financial sectors and insurance and consumer goods.
But that's really interesting because it's all about trust and credibility, isn't it? And it's still such a young industry. It's very difficult to bring consumers on directly. So if you bring the brands, they bring the trust and credibility, and then hopefully proof of concept from there will help that grow. But it's good.
I think one of the key questions is who's paying for the content, right? Is the brand paying the platform to be exposed to their user base, or is the platform having to pay the brand to attract that brand to their ecosystem? And largely that's going to depend on the number of users you have, the recognition of your brand, how important it is to that brand. And I think where we're seeing greater interest is from brands who are paying for it, where they see the benefits of that brand exposure in terms of their spend, right? So if the brand makes sense to a metaverse audience like fashion or beauty, right, then I think they're showing greater interest because typically it's a lot easier for them. Whereas brands that are potentially not as, I guess metaverse friendly, right, which could be any number of brands, including a lot of big retail brands, could be Walmart or others, where they're not necessarily very obvious in terms of being in the metaverse. That's where I think we're seeing more reluctance, or certainly a slowing of what they want to do.
Yeah, and I certainly think there's an interesting distinction to be made between blockchain games and traditional Web2 games here when it comes to brand partnerships. Because if you're a brand, where are you advertising? Where are you activating? Are you doing this in a Web2 world, like Roblox, like Fortnite, or are you doing this in the sandbox or the Decentraland? And I think, while irrespective of where you do it, I still think it's pretty much most brands are at an experimentation stage. I think it's currently a little more risky to do so in Web3 or in blockchain games. Because, as I said, blockchain gaming isn't yet a proven concept. So, these partnerships with the Sandbox or with the Decentraland, I think they require a relatively small investment from the brands, and they're just in my view, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but they're just doing it to see what sticks and what doesn't. So if blockchain gaming will be huge in the future, then it's very good. We were here early. We can tout ourselves as early adopters and so on. Everything is going to be all right. And if blockchain gaming turns out to just be a fad, and nothing concrete happens in the future, then we just lost a very small amount of money. No problem. We just keep going forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, blockchain itself is a very new concept, and we're all co-developing this together. So yes, brands are testing out, and they want to see where the future holds. But to answer John's point about if the brands are paying the experience or is it the other way around, is I think the key is to develop ecosystem. That's what we're focusing on, talking to different studio builders and also agencies that are connecting brands and studios, so that there's a pool of users that are developing this experience. And I think that kind of answers Mihai's point as well. It is a new space that we're developing. So although brands are speculative, but I think that's the way the media is going, because we're all fed up with Web 2 taking advantage of all the creators and their content.
I think actually I'm glad you mentioned agency, because agencies are critical in this relationship. So for a brand to decide on its own that it's going to invest in blockchain gaming or it's going to go into the metaverse or whatever its sort of Web3 strategy is, it's very difficult for them to do that by themselves. And they, once you introduce metaverse into the marketing mix, and it becomes a part of that overall marketing spend. So, you might have 80% for TV, 10% for online, whatever it might be. If metaverse is one of those things that agencies are challenged to deliver as part of their brief, be it a media agency, an ad buying, or a creative agency to come up with some, amazing campaigns, that is the agency that's on the hook to the company they work for to deliver that return on investment. And those KPIs, those success indicators, will be hashed out between the brands and their agencies, and then they can decide if it's a success or not. So I think if agencies are prepared and willing to present the metaverse or metaverse properties as part of that marketing mix, it will only gain traction. It will only become more successful, and adoption will grow.
And I just want to add on to that we're also investing a lot in building communities as well. We have Game Maker Fund and Creator Fund to support individual or small game developers to come on board and create experiences. And we host different contests to involve, such as Game Jam. We give a parameter of the narrative or what kind of characters to use and open it up to community to create games and experiences. So all those things, agencies and studio builders and communities have to all come together to work together to make the blockchain gaming successful.
And just touching on the point of exposure for these brands, blockchain gaming for the most part has still yet to tap into the wider gaming audience, which is amongst the billion a day. But major brands have taken a more active role in gaming in general within the last. These brands will play in helping to attract not just the gaming audience, but the wider public into blockchain gaming. And what opportunities do you think are available for those brands that decide to be the early adopters?
I think brands will tend to follow where the eyeballs are. I think it's generally not going to be the other way around. So, I know Sandbox doing such great work about creating those immersive, more enriched experiences, and that's ultimately, when you strip it all back, what's important, right? It's got to be fun, immersive. You want to spend time there, and then the brands are going to follow, right? And that's why, obviously, at the moment, if you're looking at just a sort of reach awareness perspective, that obviously is in sort of the more traditional gaming titles. But as soon as these other platforms become more fun, you want to spend more time there, there's going to be absolutely no reason brands aren't going to sort of go between the two. And it's also important to say they're not mutually exclusive, right? I think, make a great point about, this being more of a sort of a traditional holistic marketing strategy. And I think brands are going to have Web 2 strategies, they're going to have Web 3 strategies, they're going to have specific NFT collection strategies. If you take a brand like Gucci, they've done 25 different activations across all these different channels. And that leads to results like, I think they're the third, BOF did a good insight study of Gen Z, and they're the sort of third favorite brand of that, or sort of that age range. And I think that's largely because they've been doing this for 3-4 years now. And that's not to say these sort of social enriched experiences weren't happening before then. I think there was generally quite a big knowledge gap between brands and these 3.2 billion gamers. And so I think it's sort of proliferating through various different industries, and brands are starting to recognize this as just a awareness, reach sort of KPI that they can look at under a traditional marketing department budget.
Just on that quickly, ROI is really important because that marketing budget can become a profit center instead of a cost center. So I think that's really important. You mentioned the ROI. With regard to the virtual space and metaverse space, I think it's a natural evolution of the internet. Your consumers will go to the internet to find out about your products and upsell and get tech support and interact. But this is just a natural evolution. And if 79% of the population from Newzoo are gaming already, and they don't just go there to play games, they go there to interact and socialize too, then this is where we should be thinking about putting our products and services and experiences. So for me, it's just a natural evolution.
I think rather than talking in the language that we're comfortable with, right, Web3, blockchain, metaverse, right, let's just think of these as features, right, additional features that you can lay onto a proposition. So brands have been involved in gaming for a really long time, right? I worked on Harry Potter games like 20 years ago, and that's an example of a brand being in a video game, right? It's a straightforward license. And as the technology and the platforms of gaming have diversified and they've become, much greater, they've allowed more integration with gameplay from brands, right? So instead of just slapping your name on it, you can create items within a game, or you can have an advertising hoarding that shows your name at the right time, your brand at the right time. So it becomes much more contextual. So all we're doing is layering more and more features onto what the internet provides, right? And brands will be able to explore those in whatever way they want, right? It just becomes more and more complicated. But you have, it's like a menu of options open to you. So rather than just putting your name, your brand name on a game, you can do 100 different ways, 100 different things that expose players to your brand, and you can tailor those of how appropriate they are to the brand that you are. So if you're a trainer company, then you can do something that is very clearly footwear related. If it's a beauty company, it can be makeup, right? And you can do all these different varieties of things within the game, the same game space. I think that's what needs to be sold to brands. It's not the jargon, not the Web3, not the blockchain, but hey, you can do this, and that's where they understand it and where they'll get involved.
I think that's a really good point. How many people know how the internet works? But they go to the internet because of what it can do. It's going to be the same with the metaverse. You don't need to talk about Web3, just talk about the solution.
Cool. And there's been, despite the increase in brands we've seen onboard themselves into Web3 this year, there still is hesitance from many of them to explore this newfound space. What are the biggest concerns facing brands looking to enter blockchain games right now, and how do we solve those concerns as a wider industry?
When I talk to brands, it's a needs analysis. It goes back to the old school sales process and finding out the vision, the why of that company, and then finding a solution to suit those needs. I think nothing changes with Web3. It's the same old talk. So it's finding ways, whether it's your marketing spend becomes a profit center, or you're tapping into new demographics and growing your community, or creating a more engaged community. Nothing really changes.
And I think a valid concern of many brands is, will blockchain games be here in 5 years or in a decade? I think that's definitely something that is on their mind in light of recent events and not so recent events, in light of the current blockchain gaming ecosystem that's riddled with Ponzi schemes and not so many good games, really. As a brand, why would I get involved in something like this as opposed to getting involved with traditional games which are proven to work and which are proven to have millions of players who I know will be coming in every single month and on end. This is currently not the case with blockchain games, so it's, definitely a valid concern. Will this be different in a few years' time? It can very well be so, but currently this isn't the case. So, brands are slow in taking risks. They'd rather not take risks, especially risks that can damage their reputation.
It's having time to build up that data and insight to show the proof of concept. And because we're such early days, it's difficult. And there's a few great platforms out there like Sandbox, but it's very small. And I think we have to continue educating and talking to the consumers through lots of different media streams that's it for me. Education.
I think it's a great point. I think there's definitely a knowledge gap inside a lot of these big brands, because it's important for digital marketing teams to understand this is an opportunity, but the finance team, the legal team, they all need to be massively upskilled, especially if they're public companies. The complexities around digital ownership for some of these big brands is extremely complex, and so there is definitely not enough infrastructure inside these businesses. We're starting to see it at some companies that are starting to have chief metaverse officers, departments specifically dedicated to gaming and Web3 environments. And it will take time as these platforms and infrastructures build out. And that's why a lot of these brands are leaning on sort of extension of their in-house teams for support when tackling sort of these big, key, complex issues.
Yeah, I think one step on from reputational is the regulatory side of it as well. There's still a lot of unknowns about regulation, and you look at the number of free-to-play games companies that have founded their business model on loot boxes, and that has obviously come under huge strain from international and local governments, right? These are things that are being regulated as gambling is being regulated. So the idea of, exchanges and wallets and crypto, it sends huge alarm bells ringing because they don't want to fall foul of things that they can't control, which ultimately is the regulations that may come with that business model.
Oh, I do have one final question, but do we need to wrap it up?
If you've got one final question,
Sure.
guys, I will challenge all of the panel to give 30-second answers.
Let's go with it. So, touching on the regulation point, I hate to bring it up again, but one of the fallouts of the FTX collapse is the heightened focus on regulation. How do you think incoming regulation will affect brands looking to enter blockchain gaming? Will regulation perhaps make blockchain gaming more attractive to brands? And in any case, what are the most important things for brands to consider when entering this space?
I can start. Yeah, brands massively want regulation. More regulation, the better it is for brands and these big corporations entering this space. Like, as I just mentioned, the complexities, especially if you're traded on public stock markets, around opening up IP to digital ownership is extremely complex. And so the more regulation and advice these brands can receive from institutions, the better place they're going to be to make the correct decision for their business.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a risk there, especially when dealing with minor players, because allowing for NFTs in games essentially means that I buy an NFT, that NFT can potentially appreciate in price, I sell it for a profit. Is that NFT a security? And how do we deal with that from a regulatory perspective, for instance? And this is even more important when dealing with people who are underage and so on and so forth. These questions are currently unanswered. And yeah, we'll see what happens, I guess.
I think the biggest thing for me is centralization of Web3. The whole point of it is decentralization, give it the power to the people, not to some potential bad actors in the industry. So I think we've seen a lot of the failures come because of that.
No? Well, thank you very much, and please give a warm round of applause to our panel.